Okay. In the end of the parsha this week, there's a topic called Egla Arufa. Egla Arufa is when there's somebody in one of the cities of Israel, somebody has been murdered and nobody knows who killed him. They find a corpse. It's obvious that he's been killed, but there's no indication, there's no proof as to who killed him. So then basically the Zakanim, the Sanhedrin have to leave their office, their exalted office in the Beis Hamikdash, and they have to go and measure which city is closest to this corpse, this halal that was found. And then there's a process called the process of Egla Arufa, which means the beheaded calf. It is gory. And the pasuk says in the end of this week's parsha, "V'horidu ziknei et ha'egla." So once they've ascertained which is the closest city, so the elders of that city will take a calf, el nachal eitan. This is a calf, as we're going to see, it's not even 1 year old. It's taken to, and I'm going to translate like Rashi. The word nachal eitan is going to be a point of contention. We'll go with Rashi's translation, which says el nachal eitan, to a hard piece of land. Asher lo yeyaved ba v'lo yizareh, a piece of land in which has not been worked and has never been planted. Ba'arfu sham ha'egla banachal, and they will then behead this calf in this gully, in this hard piece of barren land. And Rashi explains on the word va'arfu that they will behead. He says that they behead this calf with a hatchet. Continues Rashi, and I'm paraphrasing, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Almighty said, Hashem said, Tavo egla bat shnata, let a calf that's yet 1 year, not even 1 year old, shelo asta perot, that never had the chance to have any offspring, v'te'aref, and may it be beheaded, b'makom she'ena oseh perot, in a place that has not yielded any fruit, l'chaper al harigato shel zeh shelo hinichuhu la'asot perot, to atone for the killing, for the murder of this person who was not allowed, who was not left to have any fruit. Fruit either being children or fruit being good deeds. This person's life was cut off in his prime. So the source of this explanation of Rashi is in the Talmud. However, we know that Rashi's agenda when he explains the Torah is to explain simple understanding of the Torah. He only brings other medrashic material when there's a need in order to understand. You wouldn't be able to understand the simple reading of the pasuk without it. So it's not understood in our instance. Why does Rashi give this background to the mitzvah? He says that Hashem said, let this less than 1 year old calf come and be beheaded to atone for this murder. It's like Rashi is giving a reason behind the mitzvah. When we learn simple chumash, we don't need to have a reason for every mitzvah. Rashi does not come to every mitzvah and give it a reason, right? So first of all, we have to understand, why is Rashi jumping in here with a reason? He doesn't tell us. In the simple reading of the pasuk, Hashem tells us what to do and we fulfill. Here Rashi jumps in with a reason. Also, that's one thing we want to understand. Also, we want to understand that why does the language used here is a fascinating language. It says Hashem says. It didn't say the Gemara says, the Talmud says. It's like he says, Rashi speaks in a way, kind of in a descriptive way he doesn't usually use. If you want to know why we're doing this, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem said, this is something you got to do. That's a unique way of presenting the reason here. So we want to understand why that is. Now, even though that's true, you will tell me that if you look back to the Gemara, to the Talmud, where Rashi sources what he's saying, so that's the language the Gemara used. So why are we asking why Rashi uses that? However, it's not true that Rashi always just copies, pastes from the place that he's quoting. Especially when he doesn't say that our sages expounded. In other words, he says it as if it's his own interpretation. We trace it back to the Gemara, but he didn't have to use the same language of the Gemara. He doesn't always. He could have said it in his language. The fact that he chose to use that same that same language by saying Amara Kadosh Baruch Hu that Hashem said tells us there's something unique here that Rashi is trying to give out with using that language. Number two, another thing, whatever way you look at it, why does Rashi, when Rashi does explain that Hashem said, let this be as an atonement, he positions this pirush on the Dibur Hamatchil, on the Rashi that's headed with the words V'arfu, which literally means to decapitate, to behead. And Rashi says, Kofetz, Kotzetz, or Pa Bekopitz, he cuts off the back of its neck with a hatchet. And then he says, Hashem said, let this calf that's being killed in its before it even has children, let this be an atonement. Why does that reason behind the mitzvah follow immediately after the explanation of what it means, v'arfu, that it means to cut off, to behead it from the back of the neck with a hatchet? Why does that lead automatically? Why is that it's two separate things? Why does he say it under one caption? Rashi should have said two separate captions. He should have said va'arfu. You want to know what it means to behead? In this case, it means from the orif, from the nape of the neck, from the back of the neck. And then he should have had another caption that says on the general topic that you behead the calf in the hard land. That should have been a separate caption. And on that he should have said, Hashem says, somebody was killed without us knowing, without him giving the chance to have any children or to do any good deeds, to have any fruit. Therefore, we're going to kill this calf as an atonement. Why does Rashi not have a separate caption for this? Why is it a direct follow-on on his explanation of what it means, va'arfu, the word va'arfu, which means to behead from cutting with a hatchet in the back of the neck? Paragraph 2. We could say that the explanation is as follows. Usually Rashi does not explain the reasons for mitzvahs. When it comes, however, to a mitzvah that is somehow totally different than any of the parameters of mitzvahs as we know them. In other words, mitzvahs, although they're totally a creation of Hashem, mitzvahs are not thought of by humans, and then Hashem says, okay, good idea. Mitzvahs are transmitted from Sinai. And Hashem tells us, this is what I want you to do, but still we find certain patterns within mitzvahs, and therefore once Hashem has told us these things, they kind of fit a certain, in Hebrew we'd say, mahalech. In Yiddish the word would be a gang, a certain pattern, a certain predictability. Here there's something that's very different than any of the standard understandings we have of sacrifices. Why is that? Because we know that there's several kinds of sacrifices. There's sacrifices that are to atone, like the whole the beginning of the book of Vayikra is full of it. It tells us if somebody sinned, if somebody has a guilt, they bring a sacrifice to atone. Number two, we have some sacrifices that are thanksgiving sacrifices. For example, when somebody has been saved from life danger, there's something called the Korban Todah, the Korban, the sacrifice of thanksgiving. Okay, that's another kind of sacrifice. There's another kind of sacrifice which enables the purification process, like somebody who's a mitzorah, somebody who's been with a skin disease and has been sequestered and quarantined, and part of the process is that the Kohen has to take two birds, and one of them is slaughtered, one of them is sent away. So in all those instances, we have a certain pattern on how sacrifices work. Of course, there's a difference between the three we've mentioned, because some of them are brought in the presence of Hashem, like the sacrifices that come to atone, the sacrifices that we bring to give thanksgiving, they're brought in the holy space of the Mishkan or Beit HaMikdash, or the temple, the place that Hashem has chosen to rest his holy presence there. And we understand that bringing it in that space created, the person should be v'nirtzalo, lechaper alav. Hashem should find the person favorable. He's come to Hashem, he's brought a sacrifice, he's professed his regret about what he's done, so Hashem will find him favorable now. He is mirutzel ifnei Hashem, he's favorable for Hashem. Or if he's giving thanks to Hashem, you're coming to Hashem to give thanks, you're coming to Hashem in his most revealed space in the Beis HaMikdash. When it comes to the two birds that come to purify the mitzora, the person who's been quarantined for the skin affliction called tzarat, so we understand that that process of the two birds happens outside the encampment, but that's where the mitzora has been positioned. He's been banished to outside of the camp. So the process of bringing him back in, we understand that's why the birds, even the one that's slaughtered, and it's a kind of a sacrifice, but it happens outside the three camps, in outside the walls of the city of Jerusalem in this instance. So we understand the rationale about where the sacrifices are brought. There is, however, two sacrifices that are brought totally out of the temple. One of them is the second goat of Yom Kippur, which is called the Sa'ir Lazazel, where it's dispatched to a barren land and is thrown off the cliff, carrying symbolically the sins of the Jewish people. So that's a form of sacrifice that takes place outside the temple. And there's also the Parah Adumah, the red cow that's burned, and from its ashes is used, mixed with water, what we sprinkle on somebody who's been defiled to a dead body. That will be the purification process. So those two sacrifices indeed are not happening in the presence of Hashem, and yet they are called sacrifices. We find, for example, that the second goat of Yom Kippur, there had to be two goats brought on Yom Kippur. One was, and a lottery was drawn. The right hand, it said for Hashem, and he put that on one he-goat, and the other one said La'azazel, will go to the barren land. That was on the second he-goat. The one he-goat, the first one to Hashem, was offered up in the Beis HaMikdash. The second one needed to be dispatched and pushed off a cliff outside the city, in a barren cliff. So we understand that where's the real atonement taking place? The main part of the ritual of atonement is taking place in the Beis HaMikdash, where the Kohen is leaning his hands on this goat and, so to speak, confessing and transferring all of the sins onto that goat. So that's still taking place in the space of holiness. Then it gets sent away to a barren land. That's not really the bringing up of the sacrifice. So here again, the sacrificial part is taking place in the Beis HaMikdash. When it comes to the red cow indeed is being done outside of the three camps, so it would be the equivalent of outside Yerushalayim. However, the process, really, it's not meant to be used there. It's meant to be part of the process of the purification for somebody who's impure to a dead body, in order to allow them to be able to enter the holy space of the Beis HaMikdash and offer up a sacrifice. The fact that it's called a chatat, which seems to indicate it's a sacrifice, actually the word chatat in this case can mean cleansing. And literally it cleanses him of his imperceptible but spiritual state of impurity. The Torah calls it a chatat also because it has certain criteria halachically where it's like a chatas offering, which is that you're not allowed to have any benefit from it other than using it for its intended purpose, to mix with water and to purify those that need purification. Yes, indeed, there is a medrash that Rashi does quote in the portion of the Parah Adumah of the red heifer that says, he's quoting it from the teachings of Rabbi Moshe, the Darshan, Rabbi Moshe, the expounder, which tells us how there are details in the cow that's brought, the red cow that's brought, that are an atonement. Similar to an atonement that have to be brought through a Kohen. It has to be done actually by the assistant to the high priest. It's slaughtered in the direction of the Shekhinah, in the direction of the opening of the Ohel Moed, the opening of the Beis HaMikdash. So there's still some aspects of it that are temple related. Come, however, to this ritual called the Egla Arufa, the beheaded calf, it doesn't fit any of these predictable patterns of sacrifice. Why? Because the whole thing is being done outside the holy city of Jerusalem without any connection to Jerusalem, without any connection to the Beis HaMikdash. So on the one hand, it's called a kapara, it's called an atonement. And what's said at the time of the slaughtering, the beheading of this animal is, the elders have to come and say, Kaper la'amcha Yisrael, God, please atone for your children of Israel. When kaper lahem adam, this spilled blood should be atoned. On the other hand, we don't find any similarity to what's usually done with sacrifices. It's not brought, there's no aspect of it that's brought in the Beis Hamikdash. There's not an altar that's erected over there. It should be brought up on it. It's not even, you don't even do facing the Beis Hamikdash. Even no Kohanim. Yes, afterwards the declaration is made by the Kohanim, but the actual offering up or killing of this calf is not done by Kohanim. It's actually not even a shechita. When we bring up something in the Beis Hamikdash, there has to be a slaughtering. Here, there's no slaughtering. There's no sprinkling of blood. All the usual predictable patterns of sacrifices do not exist here. So, if we would say that this is just all symbolic, it's meant to be an audio-sensory symbolism, which would be like other Mefarshim, some other Mefarshim, Chizkuni, for example, say that the same way that this calf is pure and innocent, didn't do anything wrong. This calf did not do anything wrong. We know that. It's not even a year old. And the land, we said, has never been worked. The land has never been planted. It's land that's called virgin land, Karka Betula. So what we're symbolizing is we're also just like that. We don't know anything about this death. We're not culpable. We're not responsible. We're just as innocent of this young calf and just as innocent of this virgin land, which could never have done anything once, never been activated even. So then you wouldn't be a big question why Hashem says to do this symbolism. It fits. The symbolism fits. It's just a symbolic thing. And all aspects of it fits the symbolicness that we're pure. We don't know who killed him. We didn't do it. Hashem, forgive us. However, when it comes to the simple reading of the verse, we say that because of these deeds, may Hashem atone for us. It seems that these actions themselves are a form of atonement similar to a sacrifice, but yet it's so different than a sacrifice. So now the simple reading of the pasuk is not simple anymore. It's 1 second. The 5-year-old reading this says, I've learned the whole book of Vayikra of Leviticus. I learned all about the different kinds of sacrifices. This is an atonement, which seems to be a sacrifice, but it's absolutely non-typical for sacrifice. What's going on here? Not just that. We already know from previous readings that when you bring something that's meant for the Beis Hamikdash, you bring it out outside, it's called shchutei chutz. It's called things that are slaughtered outside the Beis Hamikdash. And you know what? The death from heaven is the penalty for that. So what kind of an atonement is this ritual of the calf? So that's why Rashi jumps in and says, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he says, Hashem said, let the Jewish people in this scenario bring the calf that's not even 1 year old, let it be beheaded. In other words, there's a new instruction by Hashem, not as part of the standard instructions about sacrifice. It's an Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kind of a new, don't put this under the chapter of sacrificial offerings. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem opened up a new concept. He says that there's a way of atonement in this particular case, which is not like all the other sacrifices, not like all the other atonements in the Torah. Here, there's an atonement that happens through a particular ritual, which is in that place, in that way that is brought up, and has to be killed in a particular way. And that's going to be an atonement for this scenario, not like any of the other sacrifices. It's a new thing. So now we understand why Rashi explains. What did we ask? We asked that Rashi should have 2 captions. First should tell us that you kill it with a hatchet in the back of the neck. And then a new caption say, what is this process all about? Why does Rashi first he has 1 caption explaining that you kill it in the back of the neck with a hatchet. And then he says, Hashem said that let this be an atonement. How does that follow on? But now we'll understand why it follows on. Because the reason Rashi needs to explain the rationale behind this mitzvah is because of the extreme difference in the way that this slaughtering is taking place. In other words, once he explains the way it's killed, right away the 5-year-old says, one second, what's this all about? I never heard a thing like this in sacrifices. So right away he leads on and he answers that question. Hashem said this is a unique way of atonement, especially in this case when somebody is killed, we don't know who killed him. So let's first also understand this, paragraph 4. Understand that there's another fascinating mitzvah where we have a talk about beheading a donkey. Sorry, it's gory, but this is Now we'll understand why it's gory in the next mitzvah. There's a mitzvah in the book of Shemot after going out of Egypt in the portion of Bay that says if somebody has a firstborn, okay, let's first of all say if somebody has a firstborn son, he has to redeem him, right? The Kohen gets 5 silver pieces. Somebody has a firstborn donkey. All of this is in order to remember that Hashem killed the firstborn. Egyptians saved the firstborn of the Jewish people in Egypt. So the firstborn animal has to become a sacrifice, be taken to the Beis Hamikdash. The firstborn donkey needs to be redeemed. How do you redeem it? So the Torah gives the easier option, which is take a lamb and give it to the Kohen. And then the donkey becomes yours. Now, the truth is, a lamb is less expensive than a donkey. A donkey has more value. A donkey can be used for schlepping, for hard work. A lamb has a very minor value comparatively. It can be used for, I mean, it grazes. You can use it for wool. You can use it for lamb chops, but it doesn't have the kind of longevity and higher value utility like a donkey. So now, if you have this donkey, that the firstborn donkey belongs to Hashem, and he says, "I want the Kohen to be paid for it." So the Torah says, "Give a lamb." I want to just put in brackets. We know from learning these halachas in Rambam every year that if a person wants to give the value of the donkey to the Kohen, that's also fine. The Torah says give a lamb because that's a much cheaper option. But if you wanted to actually give the value of the donkey, that's also good. But if he doesn't give the value of the donkey, he doesn't give a lamb, you know what has to happen? Va'arafto. He has to, as Rashi, to paraphrase Rashi, Va'arafto means he cuts it with a hatchet from the back of the neck and he kills it. And then Rashi says the rationale. Who hifsid mamano shel kohen? He caused the damage to the money of the Kohen. The fichach yafsid mamano. Therefore, his money should be lost. Now, why doesn't Rashi say? I just want to give you a thought. The Rabbi doesn't talk about it in this sikha, but in a subsequent sikha that the Rebbe published, this sikha was published probably in the 80s. In the early 90s, the Rebbe gave a talk, edited a sikha, particularly about the redemption of the Petach Hamor, about the firstborn donkey and killing the donkey. And the Rebbe then explained, what do we mean here? That he caused loss to the Kohen, therefore we want him to lose his money, and therefore he has to kill it in this gory way. What we're going to understand here is that this is a very gory way of killing. The easier way of slaughter is with a very sharp knife and cutting the front of the neck, where the windpipe and the food pipe are immediately, the oxygen is immediately cut off to the brain. There's a much more painless form of killing to the animal. Why is it done in this way? And there's a reason. You caused loss to the Kohen. Why would somebody not give a lamb to the Kohen in order to be allowed the use of his donkey? Now, he's not trying to disobey God because he says, I don't want the Kohen to get the lamb. I'll kill the donkey. So Hashem says, you're ready to kill the donkey because you don't want to give the Kohen a lamb? You know what that's called? That's called cruelty. That's called decrepit midot megunot. Disgusting behavior. You're ready to lose the more valuable donkey simply because you don't want the Kohen to have any benefit of this lamb. You know what you're going to do? Hashem says, I don't want you to feel like a goody-goody, or I don't want you to feel like you're an okay guy, you're a cultured person. I just don't want this Kohen to get a free lamb. You know what? No, what you did now was you caused the Kohen a loss to something he's rightfully deserving of. I want you to feel cruel. You know what? You're not just going to be told you can't use this donkey and you can walk around living life thinking you're, a regular good guy, just you have this gripe with the Kohen. No. I want you to take this hatchet and kill this donkey to death from the back of the neck. It's pretty horrible sight. And it's not just a horrible sight, like the Rebbe will explain later on. The owner of an animal vicariously feels pain of the animal. If it's his animal, feels a connection. So you will now come to terms with your cruelty. You won't be able to hide behind the distance of, I just won't give it to the Kohen. No, you're being cruel to the Kohen. It's okay, you're a cruel guy, okay, but I want you to feel your cruelty. You know what that would do to a person. Generally speaking, that would probably cause him to rethink. But anyway, so that's the rationale Rashi gives here. But Rashi does not say, Hashem says, you caused the loss of the Kohen. You should cause your loss. Why doesn't Rashi just follows on by saying that's the reason? Why doesn't he say Hashem said? Of course, we'll understand why he doesn't say that, because it's a very simple thing. We're telling him to kill in this cruel way, right? Even the child will know that slaughtering from the front of the neck is much more humane than killing from the back of the neck, where he has to break through the neck bone till he gets to the vital windpipe and food pipe. So Rashi says that when somebody doesn't give Rashi is trying to point out that it's not that there's two options, that either you can give the donkey to the Kohen or you can behead the donkey. No. Rashi wants to say this beheading of the donkey I just told you about, which is really cruel, it's a punishment to you. You caused loss to the Kohen. Now your punishment is you're going to do something that's going to make you come to terms with cruelty. You're going to be cruel. You're going to have to come to terms with that. So obviously, really what would happen, again, because a person vicariously would feel this pain. So it's a kind of a punishment. It's not, you can either give the Kohen a donkey or you can kill your thing. No, the moment Rashi explained that the killing has been done this way, right away he says, the reason is because you're getting punished for causing this loss. You're going to have this loss in a very real and vital and really real and palpable way. But he doesn't say Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem said, he doesn't introduce it as a new thing because this is a standard mitzvah. It's not a carbon. There's nothing really astounding here. This is, you didn't want to have the Kohen have benefit from your lamb, so you're going to get punishment. You're going to have to be tit for tat. You're going to have to feel the cruelty you're imposing on the Kohen. Our parsha, though, our parsha is telling us that this is not talking about an atonement that's absolutely untypical of any other carbon we know. So therefore, we say, however, there is something, so it's an atonement on the one hand, but it's, on the other hand, not taking place in the place of atonement like it would usually in the Beis HaMikdash. So that's why Rashi says, even though he already explained what V'arfu, the word la'arof, he already explained it before, the donkey, that same word is used. In the book of Exodus, we just said, if you don't redeem the firstborn donkey, you have to behead it. The same word is used here about the calf. So why does he have to explain again that it's done from the back of the neck with a hatchet? He repeats it again here in the case of the calf to emphasize that here this is an act that's absolutely not similar to sacrifices. Because this act of cutting from the back with like a hatchet is non-sacrificial behavior. It's opposite of what's usually done with an animal, of shechita, of slaughtering. And therefore the question is, one second, how can it be an atonement if you're doing anti-sacrifice behavior? Mm-hmm. That's why Rashi says, no. There's a new thing happening here. Hashem opened up a new kind of atonement. In this case, where somebody was killed and he didn't have a chance to continue his life and have fruits, let a calf that's still not even 1 year old and didn't bring any fruits be beheaded in a place that has never made any fruits, a barren land. And everything here, therefore, fits this criteria, and this is going to be the atonement. So everything now fits in a very, very neat way, but it's a new thing. And Rashi needs to introduce it as something new that Hashem has given as a way of atonement, because it does not fit the model of regular sacrifices. Now we're going to move into a fascinating argument. What is this Nachal Eitan? What is this barren gully? Would you believe it that there's an opinion that says, we're going to learn the Rambam, that it's actually very fertile land, not a barren gully at all? How can there be such an argument? Okay. Paragraph 5. From the wondrous things in Rashi is, according to this, what we've just explained, the way Rashi sees the pasuk and why he has to come and introduce it in this way, that Hashem created a new mode of atonement, we'll understand that this fits with an argument that there is between Rashi and the Rambam. So as we said, Rashi said that Nachal Eitan means a hard gully. Eitan means strong. It means strong. It can mean hard. Here he says it means hard. It's never been plowed. It's never been worked. The Rambam, however, says, you know what Nachal Eitan in Hilchot Rotzeach, the Rambam says, Nachal sheshotef b'choska. It's a gully that has a strong flow of water. The strength is the flow of water. And that so what does it say? That it's never been worked or never been planted? Of course, if it's a gully of water, of course never been planted. It says, no. It means it shall never be planted. If it ever dries up or you ever divert the water and that piece of land, you can never use it for planting. You can never work that land. It has to remain always the land which this process was done of the Egla Arufa, of this beheaded calf, never be used. So we can say the argument is like this. The argument really has to do not about what the words mean, but about what the meaning of this mitzvah is. The Rambam in the book More Nevuchim, Guide for the Perplexed, explains what's the reason for this mitzvah of Egla Arufa. He says that this is all part of Hashem's plan in order to try and find who the murderer is. And to paraphrase, Deborah brings the lashon, the language of the More Nevuchim, and I'll paraphrase. He says, it's impossible that, generally speaking, with all of the investigation surrounding this case, the elders have to come and measure which is the closest city, and they have to take a calf, and they have to make a declaration. It's almost impossible that there will not be so much chatter and discussion amongst people that may actually generate important leads that will lead us to the actual murderer. And maybe now we're going to know who the murderer is. Rather than saying we don't know, maybe this process with all of the hoo-ha, all of the investigation, maybe we're going to know and we're going to find out who the murderer is. And he continues. And especially this becomes strengthened when we say that the beheading has to take place in a place that's very fertile land now because there's water gushing there. But we say it can never afterwards be used for planting. The owner of that land sees that he's about to get a decrease in land value. That land will have to remain barren. He's going to also expend every effort to try and find the murderer. That's how the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim learns the rationale. The Ramban says that about this detail of Nachal Eitan, what kind of a gully is it? The Ramban says, according to my opinion, this is actually like, there's a reason for this location, just like the sacrifices that are made outside of the temple, just like the Sa'ir HaMishtalech, the he-goat that's banished on Yom Kippur, just like the red cow that's done outside the city of Jerusalem. And therefore, this mitzvah is called one of the statutes of Hashem. It's a mitzvah we don't understand. Hashem said it has to take place over there in the gully. So basically, we also find that the Rambam learns that these three kinds of sacrifices, these three kinds of rituals, the calf we're talking about here, the red cow that brings purity for ritual defilement, the banished goat of Yom Kippur, are all banded together by the Rambam as well and called chukim, called statutes. However, the way Rashi teaches it, it's not a chok. Chok means unintelligible. Hashem decreed it that way, and that's it. The way Rashi learns it, it's very intelligible. We're saying that there's correlation between the ritual that's being done, the place that's being done, all of these places that are barren, this calf that has never yet had children, and it's not a chok. It's actually something that makes perfect sense. Wouldn't fit into chukim. So we basically, paragraph 6, the Rebbe says it seems that we can think of three kinds of ways of looking at this ritual. What three ways? We can look at what's being done. We can look at we can look at the one that's doing it. We can look at what's being done, and we can look at what's happening in the place where it's being done. Let's specify here. First of all, according to the Rambam in the Guide for the Perplexed Moreh Nevuchim, the atonement is because of the actual activity. When the elders come out and they measure and they do all of these actions, that action itself should generate some more information and should lead us to try and find out who the murderer is. And that would take away the sin that's that's upon everybody because it's a collective guilt. Now it will become, we know who did it, and now the that will be an atonement. Interesting. Just pointing out in a footnote, the Rebbe brings a Rabbeinu Bechaye that says this: when the Jewish people were meritorious, they would bring this calf. The calf would then wander off and lead them to the place exactly where the murderer was. It's a kind of a miraculous thing. But anyway, that's just a snippet here. If they weren't worthy, then the calf would just be beheaded. It wouldn't have that wouldn't have that power. Just to point out, in the Gemara in Masechet Sota, it says that this whole process, this ritual, stopped when there were too many murders. When in Israel there started becoming a lot of murder through gangs and through vicious people, this whole process stopped. This was a process when it was a civil society, and finding somebody that was killed was something out of the ordinary. And Hashem said there needs to be a collective responsibility, and therefore there needs to be, once we started having strong men and mafias and things, the Gemara says this process was stopped. At any rate, right now we're saying that Rambam says the actual activity is what connotes and what defines the cleansing here of the sin. And it's not just about doing the things that we want to do that should engender the discussion to find the murderer. But the fact that there's such a great, not just the activities that are being done, but the fact that there is such an awareness that the elders are coming out here, it bothers everybody. It's not just, the investigators, the detectives, but this is even the elders of the religious society, of the basin, are coming out. So, and we want to try and take revenge on this killed person, on this corpse from the one who did it. This in itself creates an awareness within the community of how bad murder is. This won't be tolerated. This won't be overlooked. When somebody is murdered and we don't know, we don't just say, okay, another statistic. How many murders were there in this big city over the last thing? How many murders were there in the in the intercity highway of Israel? No. Every single life is important. The whole balagan is the elders come out. That is not just going to bring atonement for this unsolved murder. It's going to, in general, bring a kapara. It's going to cleanse Israel of having tolerance for murder. We're going to realize it's intolerable. Won't be tolerated. That's the first thing that that the activity is the kapara, is the cleansing and the atonement. Then we have the second way of looking at it, the Ramban Nachmanides. And we could say that perhaps this is the way Rambam looks at it in his magnum opus in the book of Halachas. It's not uncommon that the Rambam will go in one way of seeing things in Moreh Nevuchim, Guide for Perplexed, and in his book of Halacha, he'll go in from another perspective. The Guide for Perplexed, he was trying to speak to the intellectual, the people that need the intellectual reasoning behind things. But in the book of Halachas, he will stick more to the traditional Halachas, the way it was taught in the Gemara. One author, not some historians try to say, obviously two different authors. The Rebbe was emphatic that our tradition is it's one author speaking in two different modes to two different kinds of people on two different levels of Torah, each of all of them being, of course, true. But the Ramban, and possibly the Rambam, the way he speaks it in the book of the Mishnah Torah, the Yad HaChazon, he says like this, that it has to do about the activities that are done. It's like a carbon. We know all the carbonas have certain rituals that need to be done this way, this place, that place. So the actual atonement is the activity, is the action that's being done the way Hashem has instructed us to do. And that's why for this calf, it's called a kapara, it's called an atonement, just like all other sacrifices. Every sacrifice has the capacity to cleanse from a certain violation that has been done against Hashem. Hashem says, this is the way you do this sacrifice. And Hashem has said that the way you cleanse yourself from being defiled with a dead body is the para aduma. The way we have atonement for this murder is through this calf that's beheaded. It's just like any other carbon. Then we have Rashi, which we started off with, the third way of looking at it, which is Rashi says it looks in a different way, that the kapara, the atonement, is not because of the activity that's being done. It's like karbanis, but it's because of not because of the action, but rather it's because of what the action leads to. In other words, the result of the action. The result of this action is that this calf that didn't have is being cut off from ever having children. It's being beheaded. So it's already a way of cruelty in a piece of land that's never had anything productive. There's this whole theme of non-productivity in order to remind us and atone for us for this person who was not allowed to be productive. He wasn't allowed to have any fruits. This person was cut off from life. And that's why Rashi says, Hashem says that there's a new kind of atonement here, which it's not like all the other karbanos. There's something here that fits the theme of what happened here, which is the person who's being cut off and not being allowed to have fruits and to develop, have children, have good deeds, and so on. Okay, now remember, this will help us understand why is there an argument between Rashi and the Rambam, what this gully is. Now we'll understand, it becomes very simple. The Rambam says we need to take it to a place that water gushes strongly, not a land that's never been used. Why? Because he says we need the interest of people to try and get to the bottom of this murder. So we need to be using a piece of land where the landowner is going to be very keen on not having this process done right because he's not going to be able to use the land anymore. So it has to be valuable land. So Rambam says, yeah, it's a land where there's a lot of water. And if we're going to do the process here and he's not going to put every effort to try and find the murderer, he's not going to have the value of his land. However, when we talk about Rashi, so that's why the Rambam learns Nachal Eisan is not land that's barren and hard, never been used, but it means a gully of water and which goes strongly. It's valuable land. Similarly, according to the Rambam in the book of Mishnah Torah, since it's a atonement similar, likewise, to other sacrifices, so it makes sense to say that it doesn't have to be in a hard piece of land. It should be in a better place. I mean, it's not in the Beis Hamikdash, but if it's just like a carbon, why should we by default think it has to be in a harsh place? It should be in a place of strength, of fertileness, of goodness, of a lot of water. But Rashi is learning, no, Rashi is saying the whole purpose here is to emphasize the negativity of what happened, and we're doing something that emphasizes negativity, that it's being done in a place that's never had any yield, killing a calf that's young, never had any yield. Not just that in the future you won't plant in this place, but this is something that has never done anything valuable. It fits the whole theme of what we're trying to portray. This man was cut up in the prime of his life, not being able to produce anymore, not have any more yield. We need to do something that reminds us of that, and that is going to be the kapara, the atonement for it. Paragraph 8, the Torah is eternal. So you understand that the teaching from this parsha is here at all times. We don't actually have this ritual anymore. But this teaching especially is valuable to us in the time of exile. What's the connection to spilling of blood? We're not talking about a literal corpse. But spiritually, every sin that we do, whether it be in speech, deed, or thought, in action, speech or thought, causes what we relate to the spilling of the blood, so to speak, of the man of holiness, referring to, remember, man is created in the image of God. There's a certain level of God that, so to speak, is called the man who sits on the throne. Again, we have to be careful with this kind of language. But when somebody goes against the wish of Hashem, he's literally taking the energy, so to speak, of Hashem, the blood of holiness, and pouring it to the wrong place. So it's a form of shfichut damim. In Hebrew, shfichut damim, murder, is called shfichut damim, spilling of blood. We're spilling the blood of holiness and allowing it to go to the place of negativity. So we have a corpse, which means a sin was done. The blood was spilled from holiness into negativity. And here's the special teaching that we can relate to ourselves. We're talking here about somebody that's found, a corpse that's found in a field. So you could say, look, if somebody, God forbid, you see that somebody has done a sin, Because of that sin, it's like he spilled his blood of holiness, and now he's in a negative space and he's in a field. 1 second. We know nobody gets killed if there's no sin. Nobody dies if there's no sin. So why did this guy die? Even, it must be from God. Now, what do you mean? If somebody's murdered, it's from God. So we know. Rashi has taught us already that if somebody kills b'shogeg, inadvertently, they didn't mean to. The Pasuk has told us, God brought it to happen through him. What? He says the guy who was killed needed to be killed. Hashem had it that person had to die. The person who killed inadvertently, he needs to bring a atonement, go to the city of refuge. Why? Because Hashem chooses to do good things by people who have a merit. Hashem chooses negativity to happen, God forbid, through people who already have something, some imperfection that allows them to be a conduit for negativity. It's the biggest blessing when you're a conduit, you're a channel to do something nice for somebody. It doesn't just come. It's a gift God gives you. Conversely, if somebody dies through a person, God forbid, it's that person was supposed to die. It's not that nobody can kill somebody that's not meant to. Why was that person meant to die? And Rashi gave the example in that case of inadvertent killing that person must have been a wanton murderer and he needed to die. So 1 second. You could say that if somebody was found here, you don't know, nobody knows who killed him, right? And 1 second, even when let's look a little bit, we're talking about somebody who died without making fruits. What are fruits? Fruits are not just children, fruits are good deeds. The person perhaps died because he didn't do any mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are protective. Maybe he was totally vulnerable in the spiritual sense. I'm not talking about somebody who died here physically. Maybe the spiritual death that this person had, the spilling of blood in the spiritual sense, because he didn't do anything to protect himself. He wasn't a person of virtue. So it's already been decreed from heaven. So you could think, I'm not going to be disturbed by this. Brought it upon himself. This person was a no goodnik. This person didn't do anything to connect to God, to protect themselves. They died. They spilled. They died, or spiritually they died. I couldn't care less. What's it got to do with me? In other words, even physically, in other words, even in the physical understanding, when a person dies in that kind of way, they were not visibly or not known to have any protective thing. A person may think, well, maybe it's from God. Why should I really get so disturbed about it? Spiritually, for sure, when we talk about a person who falls in a field, you know what a field is? Who's in the field? Esav is called the man of the field. The place of holiness, the place of civility is a city where people live. That's where Hashem dwells. That's where a man, the supernal man who sits on the throne, so to speak, Hashem, the presence of Hashem dwells in the city. In other words, in a place of Yishuv, in a place where people live civilly according to Torah and to mitzvahs. So a person could think spiritually, why should I be bothered by this person who's in such a situation, which probably they caused themselves? He shouldn't have been in the field. He shouldn't have been hanging out with those. He should have been in the city. He should have been trying to be a good person. Why was he out there in the field anyway? So he's killed. What does it got to do with me? From here we have the teaching of this parsha of Egla Arufa, of the calf. It has not just a connection to the city that's closest to the corpse. It even has a connection to the elders of that city, the basin of that city. Not just that. You know who has to get involved? The elders, the special elders, the big Sanhedrin, the 71-member Sanhedrin. And the elders of that city have to make a declaration that it wasn't our hands that spilled this blood. Like Rashi says, what they're saying is we didn't see him and let him go without food. We didn't notice him and not accompany him. In other words, we know that anybody who passed through our city, that we were aware of them, we gave them food, we gave them, what's food spiritually? We gave them Torah, we gave them proper clothing and protection of mitzvahs. Mitzvahs protect from the cold, quote unquote, and from the dangers. We gave him everything. In other words, we're sure that this is not somebody that we saw and didn't give. If we would have seen him, we would have given him all the things needed to protect himself physically and spiritually. And more than that, the top Sanhedrin, the ones that sit in the Beis Hamikdash, they have to come out and measure. They have to be involved in this process. Now, come on, what do they have to do with a murder taking place in some hinterland of Israel? Could be someplace in the back parts of Israel. These are the prestigious high court, the leadership of the Supreme Court of the Jewish people sitting in the Beis Hamikdash, men not just of good minds, of acumen, men of moral integrity, piety, the highest people in society. What do they got to do with it? So the Tana Devei Eliyahu says about the story of Pilegesh Begiva. This is a story in history, a very sad story told to us in the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges, where there was a woman who was raped multiple times, and they cut her up and sent her to each of the tribes. And a war was had against the tribe of Benjamin that this was allowed to happen in their domain. It's a horrible story, a terrible story of what took place. The Tana Devei Eliyahu says that what should have happened in that scenario in advance, what it should have been, the high Sanhedrin, the top Sanhedrin, that the ones that Moshe and Yoshua left to be in charge, they should have tied themselves with chains of metal girded their loins, literally with chains of metal, picked up their rabbinic garbs above their knees so they should be able to walk and not be hampered down or worried about their garbs getting dirty or hampered down by long gowns, and gone to all the cities of Israel, one day to Lachish, one day to the places, all the hotbeds, all the places where this trouble was brewing, and to teach the Bnei Yisrael in order that Hashem's name should be exalted and sanctified in the worlds. And the Tana Devei Eliyahu Medrash goes more than that and says that the 70,000 that were killed in the valley of Benjamin, the ones that killed them were the high priests, with a high Sanhedrin. In other words, not that they killed them literally, but if they would have gone out and done the preventative education that they should have done, this whole story of the Pilegesh Begiva, this woman wouldn't have been raped, this whole story wouldn't have happened. There wouldn't have been this terrible, horrible civil war that took place within the Jewish people. It's not civil war, civil retribution that took. So you're saying that the Sanhedrin have to get involved in this, in leadership, in the nitty-gritty of leadership, to make sure that Jewish people are living a proper moral life. How much more so when we're talking about a Jew that's in the field? We say the Sanhedrin should have gone to the cities. Cities, you can assume that the Jews living there are okay. They're in a good environment. If you know that there's somebody in the field, a place without Torah mitzvahs, for sure, the basin has to make sure to take care of that person, save him, because he's going to be in great danger. And that's the teaching for our times, for every Jew, especially in the time of the month of Elul. Month of Elul, we know, is a time when we are taught the king is in the field, the king is approachable. Hashem is approachable in order to give us the ability to become familiar with him, to become, so to speak, comfortable with him and go back with him to the awe-inspiring days of the high holy days, which are called Yamim Noraim, the fearsome days, the awesome days. So it's our job to go out to all the Jews, even Jews that may find themselves not in an atmosphere of Torah mitzvahs, may find themselves in a desert, and help out every Jew and arouse every Jew, tell them that about the great possibilities, the great opportunities that we have in the month of Elul. In the month of Elul, Hashem is in the field, and he takes everybody in an affable way, in a smiley way, and he allows them to come close to him and to leave the position of being in a field, away from civility, away from sanctity of God, and come to a connection with Hashem. And then we know that when people become comfortable with the king and they receive the king, when he's approachable in the field, then the king turns and goes back to his city. Everybody comes after him and they go back into his palace. The palace is a place that evokes incredible awesomeness. Just the mere entering the palace, the person doesn't know he has to be prepared. But once we've gotten familiar with Hashem in this 30 days, we come back to Hashem, to the great days of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. We already have a relationship. We walk in and yes, it's fierce and it's awesome, but we're not scared from entering because we already know that the king is so close to us and has allowed us to enter. And we go in and we ask on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we coronate Hashem against upon us. And this, of course, leads us to the ultimate of what the Egla Arufa, this calf, is supposed to lead to. Kaper la'amcha Yisrael, that Hashem should atone for his people Israel. When does that happen in the calendar year? On Yom Kippur. Well, we get atonement, we get forgiveness for every Jew and for the entire Jewish people. And Hashem said, Salachti kidvarecha, I have forgiven you, Moshe, like you have spoken. And each and every one of us is blessed to be sealed and written and sealed immediately into the book of the complete righteous people. Such is the Sikha of the Rebbe on this topic. I want to add just a little personal note that in 1994, when we opened the first Chabad house for Israeli travelers, 30 days after the Rebbe passed away, it's 30 years ago, and the opening of putting was a small Chinese shop house. We made a kviyat mezuzah. We put up the mezuzah. We had them. The Israeli ambassador was there. The leadership of the community was there. It was a very special moment. And I gave a talk on this topic. It must have been this parsha. And I said, I know that some people of the community are a little bit, they look at this activity with the travelers a little bit with some question. The question is, Rabbi, if we brought you to be, the leader of our community, very small community at the time, I must say, and we're scared if you help these travelers, you're going to have, the time is something that is divided, and you have less of it if you do more things. We don't look at it with a good eye. But this had been brewing in my ear. So I found it very, very time applicable to speak about this mitzvah. What does this mitzvah say? Turned to my community and said, look, whether or not we like it or not, think about somebody who's dead, corpse, and he's closest to that city. The Sanhedrin come, and the elders of the city have to say, we didn't see this person. We didn't kill him. Not just we didn't kill him. We didn't see him and be insensitive to his needs and not give him food or not accompany him. If we would have seen him and not tended to his needs, then this process is not done. Then we're responsible. In other words, what this mitzvah tells you, if somebody is in your city, you're responsible. Now, you may say, I didn't ask him to come. Didn't ask him to come. Didn't ask him to come. It doesn't make a difference. They're there. If they're there, you're responsible for them. You're responsible for them physically, responsible for them spiritually. So it's not whether I have a choice to bring them or not to bring them. They're here. And you as a community, we as a community, don't have a choice, says the Torah, about whether or not we're going to provide for their spiritual and physical needs. The moment they're here, they become an extended part of our community. Our community is responsible for them. So I'm not doing something different or extracurricular from what a community needs to do. It's just that's what a community needs to do. It needs to tend to anybody. Again, you may say, don't come, don't come, don't come. But if they do come, I don't want to give, again, all politics aside. Imagine somebody was told by a country, don't come into the country. And he's an illegal alien in the country. And now he has God forbid, an emergency, and an ambulance comes and he doesn't have papers. No, he came in illegally. What is the health system supposed to do? Deny him health services? He's a fellow human being. Whether or not you ask him to come or not, you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility. So as Jews, we have responsibility for each other. Somebody's in your town, you have responsibility. Anyway, I thought it was really spoke about the definition of what a community is and what a community, the great responsibility a community has to everything, to anybody and everything that takes place in their city, physically, spiritually, and so on. This is the Sikha, and I will say
Thank you.
Thank you.